Thank you very much. Hey, compliant audience member will tell you what to shut up. Good evening, and welcome to the last night at the Mitchell of this year's I Write. My name is Bob McDevitt, I'm the programmer of the festival, and I'm so chuffed to be introducing this final session in the theatre. We've got tonight a great lineup for you, a bit of chat, a bit of music, and we're here to celebrate a very, very fine album. I've Seen Everything by the Trashcan Sinatras. I'm not going to waste any time, so I want you to welcome with a huge Glasgow I Write warm welcome to the stage the authors of a book called Perfect Reminder, Craig McAllister and Stephanie Gibson. We've got Ian Smith from the publisher and the record label. They're going to be chaired by Gideon Coe, and joining the chat bit before the music is John Douglas from the Trashcan Sinatras. Please welcome them all to the stage now.
Thanks to those concerned for inviting me here this evening. I know we're about to discuss a record which is described at various parts of this book quite rightly as a very Irvine record. I've never been to Irvine, but I'm willing to be educated. I first heard a Trashcan Sinatras record shortly after moving to that London in 1989. Like many others from that moment, I was looking out for news and new music, and any indication as to what they're up to. And that's gone on for quite a while since. I think it's Craig McAllister in this book who talks about the group being forever shrouded in mystique and intrigue, which is part of the appeal, as I will tell them should I ever meet them. So we have John here, and also Craig McAllister, Stephanie Gibson, and Ian Smith, who put together this wonderful. Because it's a beautiful thing to hold in your hand, it's a beautiful thing to read, to browse through, to read in the correct order. Did you have any, this is for any of you really, any indication at the start of the project that this would be the end result?
I don't think Ian did, but I did. Maybe you want to start?
No, I had no expectation of that at all. Probably because whenever we do anything, we're always trying to think about how we can make it commercially viable and generate money for authors or artists. But once you get to the point, which we get to with many bands and many people, that they say the art is more important than the profit, then you take a bit of a back seat and let that develop. So all I did in that project was spend every week saying to Craig, how many words now? And saying to Stephanie, 20 colour portraits. And for me it was just a case of, they were both determined to make this beautiful thing, and I was just determined that we could land it.
Why this record? What makes it special to you? It's not you, Craig.
I forgot to see if we can go back to the last question.
Yeah, of course.
Ian's idea was a fanzine, and said you can make it kind of posh, putting some colour in it if you like. Yeah. And the idea was to tell the fans told the stories of what the songs meant to them, which is fine. But there's only so many times you want to hear about Davey from Motherwell kissed his girlfriend to Orange Fell. So sorry, Davey. So I thought there's a better story to be heard here and told, and I knew the band a wee bit, so I spoke to John and I said, tell me something about it. I think it was Easy Read, and he said, you need to ask Paul about that. So I spoke to Paul and John, put together a couple of thousand words, and I wanted it to look like we sat around the table in the pub. When they were making the record, I would sit with Paul and Stephen in the pub in Irvine and talk about it, and I wanted it to be the same sort of feel, even though Paul was in America, in Glasgow, wherever they are, and there was a lot going on as well. So the idea was it would be like that, and I gave Ian the initial, here's the idea of what I was going to do, and he just said, we'll do it. And that's why it became 2,000 words, 5,000 words, 30,000 words, 60. I think we pushed 6 figures at one point.
John, were you kept informed all along the way of what was going on?
No. happily being oblivious to it all, and when the final thing came in, it was a real treat to see.
What about this record then? Why? I mean, there are some very good. There's a good series of 33 and Third books And they are about like this, aren't they? Even the one for Velvet Underground Nico is about like this.
What is it about this record?
Personally, I was lucky enough to be underneath the studio when they recorded lots of it, so we'd hear bits and pieces coming through a rehearsal room ceiling. And I was lucky enough that the band would give me demo tapes. So I get into my room some days, I'd be taping with my amp with a note. So I heard the record getting made. It's funny because when the record came out, I didn't really play it that often because I knew the songs from demos, and when you hear the record after that, it's a bit of a fright because you think, oh, they produced it. You know, like Killing the Cabinet, I'd never heard till the record, and that came out bright and shiny and blaring because that was all new to me, but the rest of it I was really familiar with. So I don't know if I appreciated how good it was because I was aware all along it was good.
You describe it as a perfect record in the prologue, Ian.
I do.
Yeah. Why so?
Well, it's one of those albums for me, and there's very few of them in the world, and I said this to you in the green room, you drop the needle on that first track, you can't turn it off. You have to hear how it concludes. I think it's one of the very few albums in the world, and probably one of only a couple that have been made in Scotland that have that compelling drive to get to the end. And like all great albums for me, it's a funny thing to say, but the next song you're about to hear is never as good as the one you've just heard. And then you get to the end of that song, you don't want that to finish. So it's got that infuriating, you know, God, this is great, the next song can't be as good, oh Christ, it is as good. And it jumps around, it does that thing, I say this in the book, that great novels do, it jumps about thematically and mood, that you're just getting comfortable with a nice little ballad and suddenly it's smacking in the face with something really aggressive. It shouldn't hang together, and it does.
What about you, Steph? What about this record?
Yeah, I'm the same. It's just like, it's such a perfect mix of beautiful music, lyrics, a time, and I think for me a lot of it it's linked to when it came out in '93. I was a photography student, and I was pretty obsessed with the band, and then when this second album came out, it was so clearly head and shoulders better and more accomplished than the first one, Cake. And it kind of soundtracked a lot of, you know, first loves and, you know, going to gigs, and, you know, there's so many memories tied up in it. But listening to it now, nearly 30 years later, it still means the same to me. There's moments in it where I have to stop what I'm doing when I listen to it. And I don't really think there's a single album apart from that does that.
I wanted just, I'm not going to bother the audience too much, but I wonder if anybody listened to it today before coming here. Did anybody do that? Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Quite right too, that's fair enough. How do you go about, Craig, tell us about how you go about telling the story of this record. What did you do in order to tell that story?
Well, my idea was to tell it song by song, so that was where the chapters came into it. But I quickly realised, when I finally pinned down Frank, who was quite hard to pin down actually doing this, but once we got him on board and we got chatting, it all flowed from him. But I realised there was a big backstory with Steve Lillywhite and things which I hadn't appreciated at the time. So although the obvious place to start would be Easy Read, there was actually a story before that relating to the field sessions and the songs that were there that weren't done quite right, and there was a bit of ebbing and flowing because they were a bit headless and no direction. So that was part of it, which tied in from the success of Cake into that. And then it went song by song really from that. And so it involved, I counted it up through the week, and I think it was 6 to 8 hours worth of stuff and interviews and things I did. Which an hour's fine to chat to someone, but if then you got to transcribe a Zoom interview, and actually my wife said to me, she said, well, so-and-so's a really good writer, and I said, I'm the writer. So I don't want to name drop you, but Sandy Shaw said to me once that if you go to Miss Coe, they make me sound better. So that was always in my head. If you go to Miss Coe with somebody, make them sound more intelligent. That's the truth there. So John and Paul, as I said, emails back and forward, and I'd have to reply to them. Frank was more of a talker, so between them and Stephen and Davey's contributions, knitting everything together. So quite a task, and then you get the contributions from the fans and whatnot, and you want to include them, and that maybe needs to be a rewriting or a bit of tweaking, or you want to knit it together so it goes into a particular place. And there was a lot more people who would quite have liked to have been involved in the book, but it said they didn't have specific songs in that album. They didn't want to give me something that didn't feel right to them, so we could have had more people involved in it, but I don't know if you would have been happy with that or not. That'd have been
It would have been even bigger.
Yeah.
even bigger, so, yeah.
Did you misquote Sandy Shaw as instructor?
I can't remember now.
And so that's how the words came together in the book, and then what makes it an even more beautiful book are, of course, the photographs. Steph, do you want to talk us through what you did with the photographs for this book?
Sure. So initially, Sinead got in touch with me. Well, I actually got in touch with him saying, "You're releasing I've Seen Everything," and he said, "Oh, do you want to maybe do a wee project?" So the initial idea was that I would do portraits of fans of the record, like people involved in making it. In my mind, it could be a fan-based study. That was at the time in November 2020, and I had all these notions that I'd travel the world and photograph people around the world, and thought the lockdown, the kind of circuit breaker in lockdown at Christmas in Scotland, that then ended up in Glasgow, going on till the end of April. By Christmas, Craig had already written several thousand words, and I'd not taken a single photograph, and I was panicking. So by January, I realised that the photographs had evolved a bit, and I was going to have to do portraits, but actually illustrate some of the songs, because I couldn't meet people. You weren't allowed to literally meet people until the end of March. So yeah, that became my obsession. I bought this beautiful old medium format camera, if there's any camera fans in here, called Blair, a Pentax 6.7, which is like this camera that I dreamed for when I was a photography student that I could never afford it. And I started to do these landscape type pictures first to illustrate the songs, and then finally got to take some portraits. First one being Roddy Hart, socially distanced in Glasgow in the end of March last year.
And are there particular pictures that you'd focus on as being illustrated what you've done?
Definitely for the songs, some of them are really easy and quite, like, I think with the album, it's quite dreamy in a lot of places, so I found it really great material to illustrate from. But there was a few songs that I really struggled with. Easy ones were things like Hairy Years, because there was this snow globe, and at one point in boiling hot day in Irvine Beach, I'm balancing this snow globe on a post in Irvine Beach when there's Glaswegians stripping off sunbathing, wondering what the hell is this girl doing. And that picture was like, straight away, that was in the book. But the big one for me was Orange Fell, and I'll show some pictures later of the process, because it's my favourite song. It's so many people's favourite song, and it's got so many really evocative lyrics and images in it that I ended up taking probably about 100 pictures before I got to the one that ended up in the book.
Okay, we'll see some pictures a bit later on.
Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting. I mean, that's part of the emotional heart of the book. Those pictures, and also I mentioned, and I apologise for the way I say Irvine, but that's the only way I can say it. But we should talk about this place because it's such an important part of this story. So, what can you tell us about it?
Well, to quote someone in the book, they said that the first thing the band did was move from Irvine to Kilmarnock, so it's a bit of Kilmarnock. But if you want to go back to the genesis of the
What's
band,
the thinking there?
Well, there's a truth to that. Those miles are pretty important. Yeah, the record was made in Kilmarnock, but a lot of the subject matter, like Orange Fell, is a good example of that. It just comes from the memories of growing up there. It's a coastal town. There was countryside, very easy to get to, as well as the kind of urban side of it. And there was a bit of trouble there. It was a kind of town in the huff. The old Irvinites, it's an ancient old town. Were there for generations, and then in the late 60s, 70s, a lot of families came down from Glasgow, and there was a bit of a clash there. A lot of the old architecture got destroyed with ugly new stuff, and then the Glaswegians got the blame. So there was always this sort of huffiness, and combined with the sort of beauty of it. And it's a coastal town, so you get the gorgeous sunsets, and it just informed, anything that when we were writing lyrics. A lot of that is to do with just reflecting on things, whether it's the thoughts of the day or memories past. And Orange Fell was just a kind of snapshot of some of that imagery.
It's interesting. Orange Fell, alongside Hay Fever, I think is one of those with the most contributions in terms of those who want to say something about it, write about it. And when I listened to the album back yesterday, I put that on repeat 3 times, revisited that. And that happens with different numbers on the record for me, different times I'm listening to it. And Emma Pollock talks about that song being to her is the sound of life in rural Scotland. It captures that for the listener.
Well, that's the kind of people we are, you know. You just reflect, you know, do what you know best. You know, that came pretty quickly. I think early on we would try and be, lyrically we would try and be smart, and, you know, verbose, probably overly so. And then you just start to reflect yourself, and that's probably the start of it, the major start of that record.
There's also a half line in Orange Fell which Davey sings, and I've still not spotted it, but that could be my ears.
Shouldn't I let go?
Okay. That he is, and it would be awkward to say this with David's going to be on stage later on, but they're all important parts of his story. But his arrival, all of a sudden, from the back of the car, and his involvement in this record and beyond, is a very key part of the story, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. You can, I mean, the records before that, you can hear the nerves in them. You can hear a kind of eagerness to please. No, I mean, I love the first record. I love the B-sides, I love everything to do with it. But there's an age of kind of youthful, you know, bravado about it. It's maybe moved on a bit. But the next record is more reflective of us. So yeah, Davey brought that. Davey's like growing up in Irvine. Well, I kind of left Irvine and I came in when I was like 18. I came back when I was 21. When I came back, there was a kind of thriving music scene, post-punk stuff. There was a band called Rebel Dance, there was a Clash type band, there was a Dead Souls, there was a kind of Joy Division type band, there was some sort of Orange Juicy type things kicking around. And Davey was in a band called the Galloping Gunshot Boys, who were the kind of rockabilly, punky, but really literate lyrics. The lyrics were soared miles above anything that was going around. And David, you wouldn't say much, but you knew the best record collection. So for him to sort of join, it was like, oh, we're okay now.
Yeah.
The tank's full, it's great.
I want to talk about some of the other contributors to the book and other key players in making the record as well. I know, Craig, meeting and speaking to Chad Smash was, Carl Smythe was quite something for you, but his role is very important in this as well, isn't it? He was very much a believer in the group.
Yeah, well, I did meet him back in the day in Shabby Road. He gave me a cup of tea, which is in the book, but I walked into the kitchen. Sometimes if you were there early before your pals turned up to rehearse and stuff, people to the kitchen, and I think the band were in a room recording, so I wasn't speaking to them, but I was in the kitchen and Chaz was there, and he said, "Want a cup of tea?" So he gave me a cup of tea, and so that was good. But then, obviously, I tracked him down for the book, and he's in Ibiza, so couldn't meet him face to face. Anyway, resumed him. But if I'm thinking about my gateway to music being Madness and One Step Beyond, the Bag of Trousers, and the guy that shouts, "Hey you, don't want it," and suddenly you're interviewing him, and he's equally as effervescent and funny. Chatting to him, he was really brilliant. And everybody I spoke to that had a Go-Disc connection, which I've got a few. I always tried to get a Lee Marver story out of him, because I could Lee Marver story myself. And I just, so he could tell me lots of that kind of stuff. So some of that's in the book, some of it's not in the book. But yeah, he was really good. But he was the one that sort of gave you a kick up the bum to move in the right direction, wasn't he?
No.
No?
No, we kind of, those things that kind of go without any sort of leadership or things just click into place. Well, Carl was great when he came along, but the previous A&R fellow was the guy that spotted us and seen us through the early stages of coming off the dole and being in a band and all that stuff. There's a guy called Simon. I don't know if you know that an A&R band's quite an important thing, is the link between you and the sort of business side of it. And Simon was very good at keeping the business side away from us. So we were allowed to kind of bloom and get our act together. And when Carl came along, we were kind of worried that whole dynamic would shift. But Carl was brilliant. I think because he'd been in a band himself, he really slotted in well. He was, he was coming from a musician's, he kind of liked us because we stuck to our guns and we didn't say yes to everything. And Madness were kind of, more kind of business, made a lot more mouths to feed, I think. So they kind of, they'd do everything under the sun. And times have changed, we were more like, we just want to make the records correctly and, to the way that we want. So it was a bit kind of, he got us very quickly.
That was an important part of it, and more important than that, because you call him the father of the records, was Ray Shulman, because We've already mentioned the full start in Cookham. Sounds quite nice to set up in Cookham, even if, you know, and some of the stuff came out of it, didn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
But then Steve Lillywhite ghosts you, clearly doesn't want to do it. But he comes Ray Shulman, thank goodness, everything for a reason then.
Everything for a reason, yeah. And the Steve stuff, to be fair, you know, I don't think we had the amount of material that was necessary to make an album with Steve. The couple of songs we did with him did survive onto the record. But Ray again, a musician. He used to be in General Giant. I don't know if you remember General Giant, or the Simon Dupree Big Sin. Well, that was his history. But we loved him because he produced the Shakers Cubes record. And he did a few other things. He did Ian McCulloch's solo record, and there was a few things that we really liked. It was mostly his personality. He's very sort of childish and enthusiastic. Every day's on a brilliant day. And so when he helped us, instantly he could rearrange something which was a musical sort of jigsaw puzzle. He would come in and suddenly the picture was there, and he'd help us sort that side out. So the songs just seemed to flow in it, thick and fast.
The account of that in the book, the making of the record, when it actually gets to that stage of it, it seems like things really fall into place, not just with finding a producer that is going to work, but also it's a beautiful summer, is it not? It's a lovely summer.
Yeah.
92. You're watching England flail about the Euros. So it was one of those ideal situations to make a record.
Possibly, yeah. The outside world was kind of. I didn't really notice much about it. When I think of making this record, I just think about the walls and the rooms over in Shabby Road with Ray jumping around, going, "That's brilliant, fucking doing it." And us just being, you know, just like kids, we had a great time. We were having a good time.
Steph, do you want to talk us through some of the pictures now? Do you want to do
Yeah.
We're going to see some of the pictures which feature in the book, and Steph can tell us a bit about them.
Okay, so this is partly where it sort of starts. The first time I saw the band was in 1990 at the Third Eye Centre, which is now the CCA, with my friend Gareth. And this is a few years later. This is 93, on the day that I've Seen Everything came out. And record shops used to do like launches on the day that vinyl came out. And the band did a full set right in the middle of HMV. And I dogged off college when I was studying photography. It was a business class, and got down there right to the front so I could take photographs. The photographs were fairly iffy because I was doing a module on slide transparency film, and if anyone knows what that slide is, a bloody nightmare to use. So exposures were, I'm still learning at that point, but I got a few pictures, and when I was looking for stuff for the book, I found this one, and I mean, it's just really sweet because, you know, bands do things in shops.
Can anybody work out any records that are in shot there?
Well, if I'd exposed it properly, yeah.
John?
It's James Brown, box set, I think.
Palatine, the Factory Records one in the bottom corner.
There we are. Sorry. It's going to take all night. It's a nice way to spend the time, isn't it?
Feels like you know them all.
Character.
Yeah, okay, so, right, here's where I try and... Oh, yeah, so now I've just got a couple of my favourite portraits. So this is Ray Shulman, the producer of the album. And Ray was just, like, at the time I was kind of maybe about halfway through doing the portraits. I went down to London to your picture, did Peak Buffet did Ray, and I'd spoken to him on the phone, and he was quite posh and very London and quite almost eccentric but lovely, slightly bemused if I'm honest about the attention. But he arranged to meet me in Brompton Cemetery, which is beautiful if you've ever been there, and it's all black crows all hanging over gravestones like total gothic dream. And I was looking for this man in his 70s and I couldn't see anyone arriving. And then this dude appears in like skinny jeans, black glasses, cap, like hands in pockets, and I was like, oh hello. And when I started taking his picture, he posed like he'd been doing it all his life. He was a delight to photograph. And of course he'd been in this massive prog rock band in the 70s. He was used to getting his picture taken. So I just love that picture because that, you know, that's a guy in his 70s and he's cool. And the next favourite portrait is Wilson. So Ian is a bit of a legend, and he has been the driver of the Trashcan since like way. Well,
Yeah, the famous thing with Ian is, can you slow down to breakneck?
yeah, there's a lot of good stories, and he is the man with the stories. The thing with Ian is that when you meet him, you don't forget him. He's just a really amazing person, and he's got this real connection to Auchinleck where he's from, and that's like a mining A-frame called the Barony A-frame that was restored, a few years, like decade ago. And it actually is the scene of a really terrible pit disaster in the 60s, and Ian lost a family member in that disaster, and they never recovered the bodies. So when I asked him where he wanted his picture taken, it was just right away, that's where it's going to be. So it's actually quite a poignant photograph, but it's also very Ian. He's just, he's looking like Ian.
He's a cool dude as well.
He's a cool dude, yeah. And if you need any gossip, he's the man to. And then this is a picture of May last year in the old Shaggy Road Studios in Kilmarnock, and obviously there's two people missing from that picture, Frank and Paul, because they're in the States, but we tried to recreate the picture that was done for the back of Ice and Everything. And yeah, it was quite, you hadn't been to the studios for...
No, not since we left, and they've turned into flats, and very nice actually looking, but it was an odd feeling going back, poignant, just we had such a formative time in there, the things we did, I'm very proud of, and finance is the thing that took it away from us, and that's just silly, stupid nonsense. It should still be there to this day.
So is the smell from the Chinese kitchen downstairs.
Very fond of that.
Yeah. I've gone too far. So this was the start of the Orange Fell journey. So I mentioned that there was lockdown. This is the beginning of February last year, and you couldn't meet anybody. I don't know if anyone recognises that. Yes. One of my favourite buildings is the A-listed Annie's Land Tower. Some people hate, but I think it's really beautiful. That's the tower in the background. So I left my mum's house. I'd just bought this Pentax 6.7 camera. I was panicking about how am I going to do photographs in lockdown, and there was a blizzard on the way home to the south side where I live. So I did what most folk do, I get out the car in the middle of the central reservation as a police car crawled past, just wondering, I think we better go back. So I stuck the tripod down, stuck the film in the camera, and I took that picture. And it was nice, but it wasn't right. That wasn't the one. And then there was a lot of snow in Glasgow that month, so there's a lot of pictures of snow. I've got a whole exhibition worth of them. This is Queen's Park for Southside fans. Still wasn't right. This is in the Southside, this is Hutchie Grammar, I think. And I just kept taking pictures that were not right. There was another one. That's just in Strathbungo. Again, still wasn't the right Orange Fell. Then there was this one again. They were too urban. I needed urban, but with the dreamy feel of the song. And then finally, that was the one that made it. And I heard Sarah Kerson's voice. This is outside my mum's house. And the minute I got the pictures back from the lab, and it's on Kodak, like portrait film, if any photography fans again, can make really beautiful photographs if you get it right. And yeah, I just knew when I saw it that was going to be the one. And I think at this point it's really worth mentioning two things. First of all, the sodium lights are gone, they've been replaced with LEDs, and also at this point it's roughly when we got Chris Dooley involved, and he's the kind of missing person. He's the designer of the book, and he lives in Brooklyn in New York. He's a very cool, very important person in terms of how the book ended up looking. He's done things as a creative director. He's worked on music videos like Selena Gomez and huge big brands, Britney, and huge big bands as well, like Scissor Sisters as well. So he was a big fan of Trashcans and has worked with them as well in the last few records, and we just did it all remotely, so this is the point that he got involved and he picked that photograph.
Lovely. And the beautiful photos, well done. That part of the book as well. Mention of catching up with people in America, Evan Katz. Almost a standing ovation. Craig, you just want to quickly mention, I want to talk about Evan Katz and his extraordinary contribution.
American contribution. Okay, so Joe, who runs the band's arrangements, I suppose, in America, he just really pulled apart the band, and when things weren't going so well, he was the one that was keeping it going, and the internet was a thing, and the Trashcan is one of the first bands really to embrace that, and Joe was all behind all that. So when the book became a thing, Joe gave me the mailing list for the original members of the Trashcan's mailing list and said, here's some names you may want to cross-search on what the band's giving you and see if there's people you can contact. So one of those names is a guy called Evan Katz, so I didn't know. And I did this blank email to other people, and some people would bite, some people wouldn't. And I sent an email out at 4 o'clock one afternoon, and by 4:10 he replied that yeah, he was up for the book. And so I said, okay, when's a good time to do a Zoom? And he says, I'm free just now. So it was like a Monday night or something, and Monday night in our house is football and training, and everyone's going out. It's a crazy night for that. But anyway, I thought I have to do this. So I set up the Zoom straight away and got him on. And it was that thing where if you've all used Zoom recently, you know, you can hear someone's voice before they can't work the camera and all that kind of stuff. So it's this black screen, hang on a minute, I got you, hold on, I can see you, all that kind of stuff. And then he comes into your shot and he goes, there you fucking are! and behind them there's this big glass cabinet, and it's full of sort of awards and things, and a shelf of records. It was the strangest thing. And then he says, Scottish music, I fucking love it! And he brings out his BMX Bandits record, he's bringing all these things out with the pedal fishers and really sort of things you wouldn't expect him to have. And then he started talking to the Trashcan. So he's in the book and he talked about his first ex-wife. He must have constituted his first ex-wife, so you know the kind of guy he is. And then I came off the call to him and I was like, what was that all about? And then I went and Googled him and I found that he's this hot shot producer. He did 24 and he's made films, and I thought, you know, so that's why the Hollywood stuff is behind him. We didn't know who he was. So yeah, there's those sort of things. We'll never meet him ever again, but it was
He's one of our patrons.
Ah, there you go. And he leaps out of the pages. And the 2 pages he's giving like something about breathless riding themselves. Another one of the pictures, what time is it? Let me just check this. Yeah, here we go. Another one of the pictures is of Cape Brick Road, for goodness sake.
Yeah,
which I lived near, unknowing. I live about 40 minutes walk from that part of London.
a lot of that.
I never knew, for goodness sake. So.
No, not at all. I think this was another really lovely thing. When the first time I met John, I said, "But question for you: where's Cape Brick Road?" Which is the last song in the album's Earlies, and it's just a really beautiful song and a lot of people's favourite. And there's this really evocative description of Cape Brick Road at the height of all the bombing. And right where you said, "Oh, it's Bronsbury Road," and I messaged, which was when I told you, and both you, Peter Feeders, and Craig McAllister, who that's where he wants to get photographed. All 3 of you were just like, "Oh my God, it exists!" You were like, "I live next door. I live near it." That's how much that songs and places are so important to certain people, and that's where I photographed Craig McAllister. He was like, "Which house do you like? Do you get that house? Do you get that house? Do you get that house?" And
Right, so
but the thing is,
where's the plaque? Where's the
blue flag? I know
Where's the guided tour?
we were going to do that. But the funny thing is, it's now like very fancy area. It's all like, they've turned them back into townhouses. I mean, I don't imagine that your flat then.
That song will always resonate, John. I mean, it's yours. Tell us about it if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I lived there in the 3 years when I wasn't at home. And at that point, I was staying with Barus and I can't remember the other guys, both guys from Iran. And they had a spare room at the back when I was going through the place. I think I got flown out of somewhere, I can't remember. So I ended up in their back room, and it was brilliant. They were the same age as me, just over from, they'd been sent over to study architecture by the Ayatollah. And he funded their so that they would rebuild the country. And they sent loads of kids over to get educated in practical type of things. And they had 3 or 4 years in London, and we went to the Clash together. We go to like nightclubs, and we were not so much drinking, just getting out and any kind of good times together, watching football. They loved their football. So it's a really strong, intense relationship. I was probably about 7 or 8 months I was there. When I left and moved on to another job, we kind of lost touch and all that stuff. But it was powerful, powerful, formative time. Just away from home in a big city and meeting some like-minded people.
Yeah, and I think many of those who heard that song, a completely different circumstance. There's a lovely bit in the book. Mark McCulloch talks about capturing the same sort of feeling, moving to London from Ayrshire as well, but albeit 16 years later, that it captures that. But he does also think that it was Canton Kelvin son, so he thought that was a little play on words.
That was Lars.
Who did you think it was?
Kelburn, not Kilburn. He
Oh, I see.
Kelburn.
But yes, it's a beautiful way to close the record as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean the running order of the record we spent a lot of time with, because it's quite diverse sound and stuff on there. And I think that's one of the big pluses of the record. We spent a lot of time on it. I think that was always when that got recorded, that was always going to be the last one. And Easy Read was always going to be the first one once they got done. The rest of it, there was a bit of juggling around.
And this would be on 2 sides of vinyl as well, which at the time, original copies on vinyl go for how much now, Craig, would you say?
But not as much now. I don't think that's still probably chuck the fingers. I haven't checked,
But now it's on vinyl again, which is a very important part of this project, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, because that's what we designed it for. The pausing after Kill McCartney, pausing, you turn off and you're into a different place. And I think that's quite a nice sort of mindset to make a record where there's a sort of tea break, in the middle. You can start again afresh. So yeah, final, bring it back.
And for the three of you who brought the book about, to be that involved in this process with a record you love, obviously you're not going to come out of it thinking, I don't need to listen to that record for a while yet. I think it leads us all deeper into it, into a deeper love for it. Do you see that?
I listen to it every day. The minute Ian asked me to do it, I thought I'd better go listen to that again. And I listened to it literally every day till the last word was typed and signed off.
I was the same, when I was at Glasgow. I spent a lot of time kind of April to beginning of June, because the weather turned really lovely in Scotland at that point, driving to Irvine pretty much twice a week, and I actually loved it, because I was driving down, I'd be playing the album and I'd be meeting somebody to do photographs and maybe go Mardi Gras, and to me it was always sunny, it was always beautiful on the beach, so it brought new memories along with it, and I still thought, I don't think I could ever tire of playing it, and then I always also would start playing the rest of the back catalogue just to kind of ground the rest of the
It almost killed it for me. but nothing to do with the project and nothing to do with the album, and no one knows this, so this is a big reveal tonight. The vinyl world's been horrific in the last couple of years with delays and problems, and one of the manufacturer we were using decided to try and rush out the records, or rush out some of them. And about 25% of one of the batches that we got, we discovered had a flaw in it. And the flaw appeared as a pop about 22 seconds into Easy Read. So I spent about 8 hours a day for 4 days, putting the needle in, and going. So now it's got to a stage now that if it doesn't pop in Easy Read, I think the record's wrong. And if anyone goes home tonight and listens and they've got a pop, my QC failed completely and I replaced your album. But yeah, so for about 3 days all I did was listen to that opening of Easy Read. Damn it.
It's a great intro though, so
We're going to have some live music shortly, which is a real treat in itself, but I wonder if at this stage we might take some questions from the audience, should you have something. I was going to ask about, I believe Ian Wilson's here, and I was going to ask about the Velvet Underground story in here. The double booking Velvet Underground story is quite something. There are many excellent stories, so I was aware of talking through those. There's the Ivor Cutler story, they're all in the book. There's but any questions from the audience at all? If you raise your hand, a microphone will find you.
Hi there, it's not a question. I was in the band with Craig, the Sunday Drivers, and we were in the rehearsal room below the Trashcan studio in Kilmarnock many moons ago. So I just like to say, Craig, I'm so proud of you. When Craig invited me for it was like sort of to join his band. I was so bad. He said, "Right, you can play bass." Learn the bass, you're in, okay. But
You had a great haircut.
I did at the time, yeah.
Can you remember the songs still?
What's that?
Can you remember the songs still? They're still fresh. Could you pick up?
I just remember we went to the Crown Bar and sat with Paul. Didn't see John as much, but I went to school with your younger brother, Stephen. And didn't see Frank much, but they were great days. And like I say, proud of you, Craig.
Thanks, John.
The Crown is where your friendship with the group developed.
Yeah, well, Irvine started really we all started in the Turf. If you went into the Turf in Irvine, the Snug in the Turf is a great pub, but right in the back corner were all the, I was going to say older guys, John, sorry, but all John's age, all the post-punk guys who would mercifully slag you for the cut of your jean, or if the denim was the all that stuff, you know. But they all turned into being really creative, artistic, writing, music making, politically active, socially maybe people, you know. You think of all the people that come out of that big room, you know. Andrew Hagan, who does the London Review of Books, and John Niven, who was in LA for 3 months here writing a screenplay for one of his books, and all these folk came out of the Turf drinking pints of heavy and slagging folk. So yeah, then we moved to the Crown when the slagging ain't too much.
Anyone else?
Hi there. Brilliant book, fantastic. Love the sort of words and the pictures. Really exhaustive in the research. Are there any really good bits that got left on the cutting room floor that you sort of would like to have?
Can I say someone who? Well, we had a list of people who were going to contribute, famous people, and one particular famous celebrity intimated that, oh yes, she would take part in that. And John had a clip of this very person saying on telly, "I love the Trashcan Sinatras." So we contacted her and it went dead, and I was chasing up some loose ends and I contacted her again. And then it came back and it said, yeah, she's ever head of the band. Janet Street Porter.
We should have got that from the impression, actually. Like she's in the room.
So not much made the cutting room floor, to be honest, because there were a few contributions I thought, I don't know where to place them. Like Mark Wilson, who was the manager at the time, I thought his stories were quite funny, but I didn't know where they sat. And then when I went back and read them, I realised these are quite good in terms of the flow of the book. So they were placed, but for a while there was bits I didn't know with the jigsaw, but everything that was contributed went into it, so then nobody was left out. I wouldn't have done that.
For me, I just like that pretty much there was just a few people that didn't want their photo taken. I wouldn't name them because some of them are in here. But everything else was just, part of the process.
Right, well, can I just say thank you very much for talking about this book to Steph Gibson and to Craig McAllister and to Ian Smith as well.
Thank you.
And to John Douglas. And there's going to be a brief pause now while we reset to have some live music. Yes, we will. In the meantime, thanks so much.
Thank you.